my dad's direct commander, he shot himself when the Soviet Union collapsed. He said, like, I can't. My life is. I'm loyal to the party. I'm loyal to my country, but now I'm actually nobody. So he shot himself.
Welcome to Cold War Conversations.
The Chinese army, the Chinese police are advancing through the city from a variety of directions on Tiananmen Square at the heart of the city, where the student demonstrators for democracy have been for so long.
Astonishing news from East Germany, where the East German authorities have said, in essence, that the Berlin Wall doesn't mean anything anymore.
There is a clear sign tonight that hardline Czechoslovakia now is beginning to give, that it is feeling the dramatic changes taking place in next door East Germany.
By allowing the East Germans passage to the west, Hungary has broken a 20-year-old agreement with its Warsaw Pact ally. But like the refugees, the reform-minded Hungarian government is looking west for its future.
In this episode, we continue Andrej's story with his sometimes harrowing memories of how he became a child refugee in West Germany. Now, if you like what you're hearing, then for the price of a couple of coffees a month, you'll be helping to cover the show's increasing costs and keep us on the air. Plus, you get the sought-after Cold War Conversations coaster too. Just go to coldwarconversations.com/donate. You can also help us by leaving reviews on iTunes or with your podcast app provider. It really helps us get new guests on the show. You can also stay bang up to date with what's happening at Cold War Conversations by subscribing to our emailing list, which is on our homepage, coldwarconversations.com. So back to today's episode. Andrej starts with the gradual building of unrest in East Germany and his family's dramatic move to West Germany. It is a sad story in parts, but ultimately you hear of Andrej's triumph over adversity and ending up working for the US forces in Germany. We welcome back Andrej to our Cold War conversation. You said you were born in 1984, and in 1989 there's unrest in East Germany. Were you aware that things were changing at that age?
Yes, not me personally, because as I mentioned, I was a kid, but my parents, my dad and my mom together, already the 80s, not only 89 or 88, the 80s in general had something in the air. Something was, my dad and my mom and a lot of other people who I know, they explained the same, they had expressed the same feeling that something was going to change, something. So something was in the air. Even nobody was talking about it, but everybody had that feeling. And in East Germany, what happens is that with those movements, for freedom, etc., the East Germans, with time, lost not only, I wouldn't say respect, they were not scared. They have permitted themselves so much things which they wouldn't do before. So there was one case where there was a maneuver with vehicles for the communication, and there were also around 6 trucks with the SS rockets, so the Satan, the one which were actually scaring the West very
the
much.
SS-20.
Yes, exactly, on the on the trucks, because you couldn't locate them easily, and they could actually start from anywhere the war, and nobody could track them.
So these were the SS-20 medium-range nuclear missiles?
Absolutely correct. Yes. Yeah. And my dad told me that once they were in the woods, they have set up a security parameter. So they pulled out special sensors so nobody can actually get close to it. And the training was going on. And soldiers were placed on, for example, on areas where they needed to stop anybody, not by shooting, but just simply stopping them, saying, this is, military zone. You're not permitted to walk in here. What are you doing? What's your name, etc. So my dad told me one time there was a story when he was in the communication truck that they were listening to communication with sergeant and his squad, which actually said there's somebody in the woods, and this person was actually with a sort of like a camera or something walking around. And my dad remembers that like yesterday. He said like they were asking what's the deal, so just approach this person, stop him, confiscate his camera, and bring him to the Staatssicherheit, to the Stasi. And the soldiers were actually approaching this person and said to them like, please stop moving, pull your hands up, drop everything you have. And this person started to run. And he started to run like in zigzags and stuff like that. And he had his, and the soldiers reported everything directly. So one was on the communication, on the walkie-talkie, and he said like the guy's running around. He has his one hand in the, and my dad was listening to that. So he then started to run in front of him, and just the one soldier's like, stop, like drop everything and stop. And he continued to run. So the soldier pulled the gun, shot once in the air. This person didn't stop, and then they shot him because he was approaching them without anything. So they knocked out the guy, and once they got to this body, they found the camera. They actually later on developed the pictures. He had very close pictures of the rockets and everything. Had a German ID. East German ID. So what happens is then the Germans, where the army was calling the German the Volkspolizei, they approached, and then of course the Stasi was there because this was already something, it's something very big. Here's a maneuver going on with rockets, nuclear rockets, and a guy is running with a camera around and making photos. So they got his body and everything. Nobody was talking about it, and then already in late 80s, a lot of people were already just very nasty to the soldiers in general. But my mom was working in the factory, and the people said like, guys, we are sorry, some people are like this, but we have nothing against you guys. And, like, it's just like the moving thing going on. And, we have a lot of changes coming up very soon. So it was a very weird time. Even I, as a kid, I could feel this, that something was going on. I just couldn't, I didn't get it, but I could feel there was something wrong.
Right. So what you're saying, the local population became more hostile to the Soviet army.
Not everybody.
No, but noticeably there were more hostility than had been seen before.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
When the unrest was occurring in East Germany, did your father say anything about, what orders they were given or anything like that?
No, my dad said like he was mentioning this to my mom, and then also I talked already when I was already grown up to my dad about this kind of stuff because I have seen a lot of TV shows and I was reading a lot, and he said that some bases which were, for example, if they had tactical nuclear weapons and so on, they had the orders to shoot the people by less than 5 meters if they approached the gate or the barracks. That was because these were very strict. But then there were only a couple bases. In general, they were saying that if, for example, something occurs, they try to keep, for example, if a mob, or I can't say mob, this is disrespectful to the people, but for example, if East Germans say like they are unhappy and they demonstrate in front of the barracks or in front of the gate, the commanding officer said actually do not do anything. So just stay on your position, do not interfere, do not send out the military police to kick them out, call the East Germans. The East Germans need to handle that. So that's their territory, that's their duty. So when I was a little kid, I have seen at front of the base, a crowd, say it like that, of around 100 people, and they said like, go back to Russia or Soviet Union, whatever, and so on. And there were no orders given to shoot, of course not, because they didn't do anything. Only if they would just try to get into the base, I assume they would have the order to shoot. This is an army base, like you defend, this is proper, it's territory of the Soviet Union. So you approach a country without, you're not legit to walk in there.
Yeah.
So, but my dad said like he never received such orders or anything like this. Like the other guys, which were, for example, the tankers and so on, they had orders that when somebody approaches that, it was different from unit to unit. It was way different. Shoot in the air to let people just run around, but not shooting into the crowd, or it was only those very secretive bases.
Yes, but there was obviously a genuine fear that there might be demonstrations whereby those bases could get overrun, or
yes.
Wow.
But the East Germans didn't do that with the special forces, or they didn't do that. They understood those guys, you can't mess with them. They will do everything, and they will go back, say it like this, with bloody hands into the bed and sleep like a baby,
Yeah.
So they did not upset the special forces.
Yeah.
I don't know why. They were only upsetting those guys for the communication, the tankers, but a tank is even worse than special forces,
Yeah.
So, but again, it was not everywhere. It was just like one base, I remember. But then after that, the guys went off, and my mom was working in the factory. So, and the next day, she was kind of like a little bit afraid of to go to work, because she was riding the bike, and everybody knew that she's riding the bike to the factory, and I was there. But then the Germans from the factory said, Miss Smirnova, you don't need to be afraid. Everything's fine. You do your job and so on. This is just happening currently. So we are, it's not our fault. Some people are like this, some people like that. We can't judge everybody.
Right. And presumably you could watch Western TV, so you did have some idea what was going on.
No, we were not able to. We didn't have that. Western TV, the communication was actually on the base. All TVs were actually very, how to say, in some bases, I know my dad told me that they had West TV and they watched it secretly, like closing into one room and watching it. But we were actually very strongly in the East German TV, but we didn't care too much. So, like we were more like, radio was sometimes Voice of America was going through, but then the communication guys actually knocked out the signal,
they jammed it.
Usually, yeah, they jammed it. Exactly. I'm sorry. They jammed at the signal. But I remember when my dad, there was like one officer, he invited several sergeants and soldiers to his to the house, and they had a TV and a VCR. So we watched, I think, one of the first movies. I think it was a horror movie, and Terminator or something like that. So it was like something, wow, and I still remember this one. I was a small kid and I was scared to death, like I didn't watch it the full thing, but when I watched first time Terminator, I was like, wow, like something unusual. You never seen that, this is like, wow. Yes.
And as a kid of that age, never having seen that, it's difficult to distinguish fiction. The fact it's fiction as well, I think.
Yes, this was, I could imagine a tank, I could imagine a rocket, I could imagine a gun, but I couldn't imagine a robot, like I seen them from books, funny pictures of robots and stuff like that, but that was just cartoons or like painted robots. But here you see a machine walking around, so it's just like, wow, mind-blowing,
No, absolutely. How did your parents view the unrest in East Germany at the time?
We have recognized one thing, that the entire thing is collapsing. The system is collapsing. So everybody was afraid of that because a civil war could start. And my brother was already on the base, and my mom, my dad, my brother, they said like we need to move, we need to go, we need to try to go to the west because in our home country there might be a civil war, and my mom was afraid that I and my brother get involved into it and my father gets killed because the entire situation was just going out of hands and it was a chaos, big chaos. So the wall actually already came down, and then actually we moved. It was actually the time when we were already moving to the west.
Okay, so the wall came down, but you were already planning to leave anyway.
Well, how to say? My dad deserted. My dad deserted because he was afraid of. My mom was afraid of the fact that we are going into unknown future. You just need to imagine the entire system collapse.
Yeah.
You were raised and born in one country, and tomorrow this is a completely different country, and there's no law and order. And you know by yourself that the 90s until the 2000s were actually the most horrible time for the former Soviet Union. Western people cannot even imagine how worse it was. It was horrible. People were surviving, and you have those 90s where you have all those gangsters, all those multi-billionaires coming out, the killing, how many people made suicide and so on. And my dad's direct commander, he shot himself when the Soviet Union collapsed. He said like, I can't, my life is, I'm loyal to the party, I'm loyal to my country, but now I'm actually nobody. So he shot himself.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I can't imagine it, but I can understand that if you've been a true believer in, communism, socialism, and suddenly that just disappears and those beliefs are completely undermined, that your whole sort of, I don't know, personal compass is removed and you just don't know what your purpose in life is.
Yeah. My dad, by the way, my grandpa, my dad, my mom, anybody from our family was never a party member. So, Komsomol, yes, but my parents, but never a member of the party.
Yeah. So you said that your dad deserted. So with the opening of the wall, he had an opportunity then to cross over into the West, I presume.
Yes, he had the opportunity, and it was actually done. It was a night mission, say it like that. So we had East German friends who helped us, and we moved over there. And it's a story which is giving me still goosebumps because my dad could get shot and so on, but when we arrived in West Berlin, we were waiting around 15 hours for our dad because he was walking and then riding the bicycle and stuff like that. And my mom was thinking that he got caught and court-martialed. They wouldn't shoot him, but at least like 20-30 years prison. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah.
What can you remember of that night then of crossing into West Berlin? I mean, where you were picked up in a car by your East German friends?
It was a truck. It was a truck. We were riding in the truck in the back, and when we crossed, it was already chaos. So we were doing the regular, how to say, a regular street, not the highways or not like the common streets, and the borders, the entire system. You just need to imagine the entire system collapsed at one night. So everybody was just like, there was a shock situation. So everybody was missing a lot of things, what's going on. And we went to West Berlin at that night, and there was a long ride. I remember that, like I can remember that bumpy ride on the truck. And then we went to one of those stations, pickup stations for sort of refugees. And my dad was already right away contacted by which is MI6, the German Secret Service, and the Americans. Because my dad was in the communication, he was an officer, he could provide some information, but I can tell one thing: my dad never did provide any information, because he said, like, I was working, but that's it. I have no useful information, and he wouldn't give it out. I mean, like, even he left, he wouldn't do it like others who said, like, okay, give me a good life in the United States, and I give you the secret, the codes for the geographical codes where the things are staying, something like that. My dad, he had access to information, but he never. He even talked to me about it. I asked him like several times about it. He never provided me anything useful, said like that, for me as a person who loves history. And we were offered to go to the United States, to the UK. My mom said, like, no, because my grandma was in Ukraine. So when we go to the United States, probably we will never see our grandma. And what happens is then that we stayed in Germany, and then we went down. They drove us from West Berlin up to Bavaria. And I honestly can tell you one thing: even I grew up in Germany, I hate Bavaria, because a lot of bad things happened there, and I have bad memories. Even I grew up, I went to the kindergarten, I went to the school, I finished my education in Bavaria and everything. There were good times too, but like, probably if we would move to a different state in Germany, like a different, not Bavaria, it would be different. But you see, now I'm here in Ukraine, so I actually, how to say, I washed off the sins of my dad on my own skin. I moved back to Ukraine, So
yeah, I'm not sure they were sins, but
no. This is like more said in terms of that. I could go to the United States. I lived for 1 year in the US. I lived for 1 year in China. I lived for 4 years in Ireland, and I can go with my German citizenship anywhere in the world. And I can get a job. I don't have a problem with that. But I got to a point that I said, like, I need to go home. I'm like a salmon. The salmon is born in the lake, moves out, travels in the sea, and then when he's getting older, he's moving back to the place where he was born. So similar with me, and my parents will do the same very soon. They will also move to Ukraine.
What was your citizenship status in West Germany? Did you become West German citizens?
Just close your eyes and just think of that. We are Soviet citizens. We're not Ukrainians. We're not Russians. We are Soviet citizens. We arrived in West Germany, and then the passports of my parents were taken. So we were without citizenship. We did not. It was like the movie The Terminal with Tom Hanks. Like when he was catched in the airport because he stuck in the airport because his government, there was a revolution and he lost his citizenship, so he couldn't travel out because he was actually a nobody. And the same with us. We were nobody. We didn't have the Russian or Ukrainian citizenship, and we never accepted the Russian or the Ukrainian citizenship. So then it took like, we were in Bavaria and we couldn't go out because the last soldiers from East Germany moved, Soviet soldiers moved in 1994, and we lived in West Germany. And of course, there were the officers and some units which were basically hunting people. So if we would even go, for example, to Ukraine, they would arrest, for example, the family, So we were staying in West Germany, and we could only talk to my grandma through phone, through letters. And sometimes when people were already starting to driving around, like from our home city, and they knew where my parents lived, and we gave them like supplies, food and stuff like this, so they can actually send it to my grandma, money and etc. So we were living there, and then only after 94, when the last soldiers actually moved out of East Germany and left Germany in general, we visited the army bases where we actually were. So back in the days, there was a lot of vehicles there and stuff. It was more like it was a call, like check the place where you lived, So we went there, and the older I was going through the abandoned army bases, and I found, for example, army tags and cups, and I actually took that because this was from my childhood. Whatever happens then, it was one thing, but I remember those places, and abandoned places, abandoned army bases is a most horrible thing, especially when you grew up on them and you remember the time people were moving, laughing, buying stuff, talking to each other. Now they're abandoned, So
yeah, it must be very unnerving and spooky, even.
it was spooky. If I tell the entire story, I think it's not enough 2-3 hours. We can actually write a book about our family, honestly, because there's so many things which I have experienced in West Germany, and it didn't knock me off the legs. I had a hard childhood in West Germany, a very hard childhood, but it did not. I'm not angry at all Germans. As I mentioned, I can't be angry at all of them. There were some a-holes, I'm sorry,
no, that's fair enough.
Which made my life a little bit hard, and not only mine, but our family's life. And but I cannot judge everybody negatively. But I love East Germans. I tell you one thing, I love East Germans. Always when I visit East Germany, not Berlin. Berlin is not anymore the same. But when I go to Potsdam or Rüdersdorf or those areas, the East Germans they have something, and they got stuck in that thing, it collapsed one thing. They love their country, but they do not recognize 200% with the western part of Germany, because the western part said you are Aussies, you're from East Germany, you don't have anything. So it's a weird thing. I mean, if you went through that once, my wife can't identify with that because she doesn't have that story as I have. But this is also giving me the opportunity in my past to be very open to things like the conversation now. I'm actually very easy to talk to. I'm a very good friend when it comes to that. If you need help, I will help. I'm reaching out my hand to assist somebody if the person is either in danger or he needs really help. So it kind of, my past formed my future character. That's how I would say.
Yeah. No, that was very, very eloquently put. So it sounds like you had a very bad experience in Bavaria, presumably because you were Soviet citizens.
We were refugees. So basically, you need to imagine one thing. You are a refugee. You will get put into a truck. They drive you to a village which is surrounded by woods. Those people there have no clue about anything. They put you into one house. My mom, my dad, my brother, we were put into one house, and they came into, my parents were starting to clean out the apartment and stuff because you don't go into a dirty, you don't know who was living before. So my mom started to clean everything, wash everything, etc. So people came into the apartment and said, "Mrs. Smirnova, do you know how to turn on the light? Do you know the switch is turning off light? It's magic. It's like magic." They thought we were retarded or something like that. I said, what the heck, just get the heck out of the thing, And they were very weird. And then when I went into the school, and that was from that I remember that part, and that's not the only part. When the teacher was said at front of the entire class of 25 students, it was the third class. He was saying, so boys and girls, do you know actually who started the Second World War? But as I assume, he was an old Nazi or something like this, like a person who was very tied to the old ideology. And he said, he turned around and he pointed with the finger. He said, those Russian pigs actually started the war. So you need to blame him, this person who is sitting in our classroom, for everything which, for example, your grandparents lost and so on. So you can imagine, I was the only foreigner in the class, and they started to beat the crap out of me every freaking day, and nobody could do anything. Nobody was doing anything. My parents were not able to talk because, you know, my dad understood and he spoke German, but it was not the top line
Yeah.
of German, you know. So when you communicate, it was hard. And then we moved to another place, and I was actually till the eighth class or eighth grade, not class, grade. I was always the kid in school where I was actually the only foreigner, the only Russian-speaking person. So I was bullied for entire 8 years. I was bullied every freaking day, and uh, I, I turned into. I was a very nice small kid, you know, like I was always friendly. I helped and everything, and I never understood why is it that I'm so different? Why is it that the other children don't want to play with me and so on? And since the kindergarten, this happened since the kindergarten. Nobody played with me. I was always by myself, and. Then I think it was in the fifth grade. We moved a lot of around. So we were never in one place. We moved around, I think, around 12 or 13 times, because by the German government they said like you need to move from one place to another one. You cannot stay here, you know, like so. And when my parents asked for work, they said, okay, first the Germans. Second is the Russian Germans. So the people who have German ancestors but lived in Russia now are immigrated to Germany. Then Turks and everything else, and you are on the last spot. So my parents were forced to work illegally. They were doing a lot of work and getting paid illegally because they couldn't just sit at home and stretch out the hand and wait for the German beautiful government to pay us money. My parents worked the entire life, so they were cut off of that. And they gave us for the first class, for example, we received those used backpacks for children, and I received one which was absolutely dirty and so on. And my mom said like we need to work to get him the stuff. So they got me a brand new backpack, and I remember that like yesterday, you know. So and I don't know, it's you know, a lot of things happened, and the most interesting part was that when we were talking to the guys from the U.S. Guess like it was either the CIA or secrets, NSA, whatever. There was a guy and a woman, Larry and Jin. Jin was also like 1 meter 60. My mom told me the size of my mom, and Larry, he was like smaller than the woman, you know. So they told my parents like, if you stay here, you will have a little bit harder life. So like you need to think twice before if you want to stay here in Germany or you want to go with us to the United States. We give you the opportunity to live there. My parents didn't accept that because my mom was afraid that my grandma will die in Ukraine by herself, and she will never forgive her that we left my grandma. So that's why we stayed in Germany, to be closer to my grandma. And then I don't know. It's a weird story. Honestly, it's a weird story. So.
Listen, I really appreciate you sharing that. I think it gives a incredible insight into the experience of a refugee in a foreign country, and also being a child in a school where you're different from others in there. I'm almost lost for words. I just found that really, really powerful, you know, listening to what you were saying there. So I really do appreciate you sharing that with me.
You know what I want to tell you, one thing, that for me the English language was always something like, you know, my mom wished that her children will speak several languages, and here we go, you know. The school time was sort of like a weird time, but when I was in the 9th grade and I was doing the final exam in English, my teacher told me in front of the class, Andrej, she told me right in the face, you are retarded in English. And my English was very bad. I couldn't I couldn't express myself as I do now. Maybe I have somewhere an accent, maybe I say something not the correct way, but I can express myself. I express what I think, how I feel, and etc. So she told me in front of her, like, Andre, you're a retard. You will never learn English and you're a loser, something like that. And what happens is I chose for my last exam in English the B-29 Flying Fortress. That was my exam thing. So I purchased, a friend of mine got me from the army base a book about the B-29 Fortress. And I was, that maybe sounds very bad to Germans, but I was actually proud of telling her that. That was my reflection on the feelings, how I was actually pulled and kicked, that those machines were flying over your country and they dropped that stuff on your people. And I explained it the way, not with pride. I was just like trying to do my best in English. And I had a friend of mine my parents back then were starting to work with the army, with the US Army. So they actually received the contract in 1997 and started to work on the Army base for AFIS, for Army Air Force Exchange Services. So they were concessionaires. They were offering a lot of different things from, like those Matryoshka dolls, the business on the base. So it was actually very hard to get to the base, but the first time I was on the army base, I heard English, and the people on the army base, that's why I got very locked into that. They were the same like the Russians. They were very friendly, but they were even more friendlier. They were very polite, they helped us and everything. And then what happens is the teacher gave me, that's how I got to know the people on the base. They got me books, and, my first words were like, hello, my name is Andrej. How can I help you?
Mm-hmm.
And bye-bye. That's it.
Yeah.
And I was selling stuff. I was assisting my parents to do the sales on the base, And I got this book, and I told her the story, and she was buff because everybody was choosing some other thematics, and I chose actually the B-29. And then she gave me a 4, a D. Even it was a B. And she gave me that, and then I left the school and so on. And then many, many, many years later, I was living already in the city of Würzburg. That's where I mostly spent already the time when I was living in Germany. And I was invited on the army base to do an excursion, tour through Würzburg, for tour guide for some American officers and sergeants. So I already had the German citizenship, but still I was a foreigner telling Americans about the city of Würzburg. So what happens is you can just imagine that I have a group of around 30 people, and I walk through the city. So I made a plan. I showed that to the MWR that was actually on the army base, the group which was actually in charge of they did the bazaars, the shows, etc. for the army. And I told them, like, I will go to this place, this, and I will tell them. So the lady, Mrs. Johnson, said, like, yes, Andre, you can do this and you can improve your English and so on. So I go up the main street, and I have those soldiers and officers around me, and I see my old teacher. And that was already around, 6-7 years after I left the school. And I see her, and I walk up to her and I say, hello, how are you doing? And she's like, hello, who are you? And I said, like, Mrs. So-and-so, I will not tell the name. Do you remember I'm the stupid Russian kid who you told me, like, I will be not able to learn English and so on? Oh, Andre, how are you doing? I said, like, I'm very well. I'm actually doing a sightseeing tour for my American soldiers or friends from the US Army, and tell them the history about your city. I killed her with those words. I killed her. I stepped on her without physically touching her, and I moved away, and I said, like, that's it.
Yeah.
I paid off my thing. And working on the army base, my parents we were on the army base from 1997 up till 2013. When the army base closed down. So my parents were actually the last concessionaires who left the army base. Now it's actually turned into a civilian thing, but a lot of things were destroyed. And I had the best time on the army base. Even it was hard, I helped my parents on the weekends. I did never take off a weekend. I helped my parents always.
I do hope you found Andrej's story interesting. We have further photos and information in our show notes, which are at coldwarconversations.com/episode and the number 87. This will also show as a link in some podcast apps. Don't forget, if you'd like to get that Cold War Conversations coaster and bask in the warm glow of keeping us on the air, then head over to coldwarconversations.com/donate. Or again, click on the link in your podcast app. And if you can't wait for the next episode, do visit our Facebook discussion group where Andrej, our other guests and listeners, just like you, continue the Cold War conversation. Just search Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thank you very much for listening. It is really appreciated. Goodbye.